Thank you, Kara. I'm not sure where she disappeared to. Good evening and welcome to the Mercantile Library. My name is John Faraday. I am the director of this lovely place. So let me thank you very much for joining us this evening. I want to say that this is the type of night I imagined when I started working here 7 years ago. This is what I hoped we could become. I dreamed of a library that was inclusive and collaborative and sought out the greatest thinkers and voices of our generation. And honestly, we had some ground to make up. We were never a bad library, just, every place gets a little limited in some ways or another. Our idea of the best voices and thinkers ultimately started to all kind of look the same. And they never wrote a book about a tribe called Quest. But fortunately, for me and for everyone, is my predecessor started making some changes well before I got here. And we have only kept our foot on the gas, trying to be more inclusive, smarter and better library. So thank you very much for your patience, and sorry it took us so long. Regarding those collaborations, I would like to sincerely thank our partners in this evening, Urban Consulate, Wordplay, and Downbound Books. Downbound is over there selling seemingly every book the man has ever written. So if you want it, we got it, and he'll sign it. We will get to tonight's speaker in just a few moments, but first I wanted to mention two other events that we have coming up really soon that you might be interested in. Wednesday, that's the day after tomorrow, Beth Macy is coming. She is a journalist from Ohio who wrote the book Dope Sick, which is a really important book, and you can tell it's important because it got turned into a television show, so it must matter. It's the remarkable story about the ravages of opioids in our communities, and now she has a new book, which is called Lazarus, which for a Catholic boy who went to an all-boys Catholic high school, I think I know what that book Lazarus is about. Is there life and redemption next after a crisis like that? And we will find out. It's an important subject, and it's right here on Wednesday. And then on September 21st, the Albert Pyle Urban Lecture features Dr. Nisha Botchway. She is an academic primarily, and she writes about public health and urban environments and health equity. Incredibly important subjects, incredibly relevant. That is September 21st here. Tickets available for both, I think. Tickets are still available for both, so please come. We're looking forward to those events. I think it's important to learn about these things. Another one of my dreams when I started here was that a good library can turn people into better citizens. And I still think it's true. I don't think it's true every day, but I think it's largely true nearly every day, which is about as good as you're going to get from me. So thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for wanting to listen and to learn. Those are hard things to find today. Sitting in a chair and listening to someone else's ideas, it's something we should all aspire to, and you guys don't aspire to, you've done it. You're doing it right now. So thank you for being here, and thank you for doing that. Enough about me. Let me introduce the Mercantile Library, City of Cincinnati, Poet Laureate. Yaeli Kamara is a good friend and a stunning poet. Please welcome her.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. Everybody's excited to see Hanif tonight. I know I am. My name is Yaeli Kamara, and I am the Cincinnati and Mercantile Library Poet Laureate, not Youth Poet Laureate, Poet Laureate. I spent a lot of time with Youth Poet Laureate. And also the Director of Creative Youth Leadership at Wordplay. So it's a dual honor to be standing before you today. And I'm going to share one poem and introduce Hanif afterwards. And he had an amazing workshop at Wordplay. Some of the attendees are in the room today, and made us really sit with the idea of thinking about wonder and how we can find wonder in everyday occurrences. And also thinking about sports and pop culture and other aspects of our lives where we can distill different lessons. And so I'm from Oakland, California, and most people know that Marshawn Lynch is one of our patron saints in Oakland, California. And so I wrote a poem about his Super Bowl 49 appearance, and I think y'all may not remember Super Bowl 48, 49, 50, but it's when he said, "I'm only here so I won't get fined." People are laughing because they remember. And I thought about that moment and what he was actually saying in that moment. So this is a poem for Marshawn Lynch. When you say I'm only here so I won't get fined, I feel my heart booming beneath the lapel of my corporate gray blazer. I keep refreshing the YouTubed you in my office with the ka-tink of the mouse click. I see you, see me, see you, see us. The questions keep cascading from the reporters' lips, their voices close, but they themselves can't even catch the reflections off the onyx glint of your stena shades or the saffron gloss of your gold tooth. You are in beast mode, yards ahead, running a play foreign to those unencumbered by neither the weight of fatigue nor public displays of perfection. In crushing irony, the verb's bittersweet symphony fills the silences designated for your responses that never come. I'm only here so I won't get fined, you repeat into the microphones and recorders hovering above the camera frame and podium, roving like a cluster of angry clouds ready to storm all over the I shall not be moved of you, ready to storm all over your navy blue and gray fitted cap that covers your crimped locks, the licorice sticks that dust your head, your shoulders every time you turn your head toward another question that receives the same response. I'm only here so I won't get fined. In the span of 4 minutes and 51 seconds, you say it 26 more times for the people in the back, behind the back, I counted, back to front, and back to the future. By the third video replay, I close my office door and send the hollowed footage to my homegirls, like, can you believe what he just did? Awestruck, nonplussed, gobsmacked, I am so grateful and jealous of you, Marshawn. I too have thought 10 times about what I say and which one of my not so many words will be melted down and fashioned into a spear destined for the flesh covering my rib cage. I too have wanted to become a miracle in my own black mouth, say nothing when I've been urged to forecast the future of my team, the team I belong to, or the failings of my tongue or body. I swivel in my desk chair and think about the long table at which I will have to sit in less than an hour. All of the ways I will be misread and misheard, wishing I could paint the boardroom walls with your 7-word protection prayer. But instead, I forward the video to those who need it, in classrooms, in cubicles, in courtrooms, on sidewalks, in transit, far from home. We watch your art immaculate, make a still life of goofy questions. All of their inquiries rise and fall to the floor. What strange discolored fruit you do not eat. I keep your psalm under my tongue like a blade, but remember who I am and tuck it between my 2 front teeth. I smile when I tire of the game. My silence, a nice nasty so smooth, it honeys, then butters the air. Thank you. I hope Marshawn Lynch catches that on Crowdcast. So now, without further ado, I'd love to read Hanif Abdurraqib's bio. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His poetry, essays, and music criticism have been published everywhere good. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was released in 2016 from Button Poetry. It was named a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Book Prize, and They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us was released in 2017 by $2 Radio and was named a Book of the Year by BuzzFeed, Esquire, NPR, Oprah Magazine, Paste, CBC, the Los Angeles Times Review, Pitchfork, and I can't say that all in one breath, and the Chicago Tribune, among others. He released Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest with the University of Texas Press in 2019. The book became a New York Times bestseller, was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and was longlisted for the National Book Award. His second collection of poems, A Fortune for Your Disaster, was released in 2019 by Tin House and won the 2020 Lenore Marshall Prize. In 2021, he released the book A Little Devil in America with Random House, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Penn Diamonstein Spielvogel Award for the art of the essay. The book won the 2022 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction and the Gordon Byrne Prize. Hanif is a graduate of Beechcroft High School, and I want to add the pride of Ohio and an international treasure. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Hanif Abdurraqib.
Watching the Notorious Big's funeral procession for the 17th time, I can't help but notice the white wings of the dove and its aimless twirling above the black whips pouring slow down the block, and the wrists occasionally flung from their tinted windows, white diamonds ascending towards the off-white sky, and in a moment, no longer than the exit of a half-drawn breath, the dove finds itself above a car with its trunk open and overrun with a chorus of soft white roses, and it is here, I swear, I cannot tell where the feathers end and the petals begin, to say nothing of the clouds, which in this joyous exhale of a second are delighting in the marriage of all this fluorescent white, high stepping down the aisles and locking fingers with the smoke blown from the mouths of the black folks, bouncing atop cop cars and shaking the fences of the check cashing spot. There are graves we do not dance upon, but they are certainly not these. And there are the two black boys dangling out of a high-rise window, their mouths open and dark as solar systems, their hands pointing in awe at this confluence of small and clumsy heavens stumbling toward one another, perhaps in awe as I am now, or as I was then when the dope boys came back to the block in summer and their white car doors flung towards the sky, a fleet of divine hunting birds lined up along the basketball courts, Biggie's voice pummeling the wall of humid air. The song says somebody gotta die, but doesn't say who. Doesn't say where, doesn't name the street people will push their closed fists into while the wheels of a hearse stumble along a plague of potholes. The song suggests death as necessity. Be grateful there is still enough earth to be buried under and a set of hands that might love you enough to do the digging. The casket weighs the same no matter who rests inside of it. I propose that death itself is the weight, which is what you might say to me now to make sense of why I cannot lift the box that holds what is left of your ashes, but easily raised you on my shoulders when we were young and light as feathers, stretching up towards the branches and taking what we could from abandoned nests. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Hanif, and it's really nice to be here. It's really special to be here too. I've never read in Cincinnati before, and so, which was something I kind of realized recently when I was charting through all of the kind of northern corners of Ohio I've read in and have never read in Cincy. And though I was fortunate enough to give the commencement at the Art Academy of Cincinnati, which was really cool. And so this is a real gift, and it's a real gift to be in this space and to see so many of you here. So thank you so much for being here. I was so nervous, you know, and perhaps remain a bit nervous. And the remedy for that, I suppose, was, well, I'll just read a bunch of new stuff that not a lot of people have heard before. And if I get through it, then we'll see what we do. I'm going to read a few poems, and then I'm going to read some stuff from a new book that won't be out for about a year and a half. Lord willing, who knows? I started thinking recently, and this was, well, anytime I say recently, I could mean anytime in the past 3 to 5 years. But I spent some time thinking about how commonplace police and TV shows are, right? And like how that wove itself into my childhood understanding of police and policing, and how it still is impacting, I think, cultural understanding of police and policing. So I wrote this series of poems. They all have the same title. I'm going to read a couple of them. All the TV shows are about cops. The psychic with the glowing window next to the pizza shop tells me the thing about the end of the world is that it already happened before you were born. So I wander through the poisoned leaves of the forest. From my bare cupped hands, I drink from the brown river that divides downtown Columbus between the haves and have-nots. It is easy to understand why America so loved the photo of tear gas winding its way around Season's greetings hanging over a street in Ferguson, packed with cops in riot gear. Somewhere beyond the baton severing of winter's chill in the glass being kissed into webs, one might be able to imagine a family placing boxes underneath a tree, wearing matching sweaters and watching another movie about ghosts. America loves its contrasts, but never its history. The blades that feast their way through the tree's bark remember only the sweetness of collapse, not the joyful gathering, not the ornaments hand-painted by someone who survived a riot generations before the one howling at these doorsteps. Season's greeting to this new season of the bandana in the back pocket, and then swinging from a once familiar face. I breathe in the scent of my own living to avoid the cars on fire, the way the eyes burn themselves shut. A seasonal greeting to the way my heart ghosts its own rhythm when I text, I love you, please tell me you're safe, and hear nothing back in the time it takes for a person to be pulled from a car's open window. To the worry that parks itself beneath the skin of my palms. My homie ran for a fence with a stolen cell phone in his pocket and didn't hear the cop yelling before he heard the gun go off. Or maybe there was no yelling at all. Witnesses say one sound can be swallowed by a louder, more violent ruckus. Somewhere beyond, a family places a box underneath a tree and begins to shovel the already ended earth, wondering if this is all the apocalypse has to offer. I usually don't give cultural context for things I read but every time I've read this poem a few times and I feel like it does make sense to offer a little cultural context. The image that ends this poem turns on a scene in the show The Wire. I don't know if anyone's seen a little known show called The Wire. But it's a scene from perhaps season 1 where Carver jumps the top. Does anyone know this scene where Carver jumps the top of the car and yells at the kids who were hiding in the like projects? Okay. If you don't, it doesn't matter. We'll figure it out as we go, all of us. I'm thinking it's wild because, so a small funny story is that one of my dear friends and my longest tenured, most beloved roommate is from Cincinnati, my buddy Gabe. And I told this story before I got on stage. I don't watch NFL. I divested from the NFL in 2018. It's whatever, it's not a big deal. But Gabe and I have played in this fantasy football league since 2012 or 13, and so I'm still in it because I love Gabe. And the matchup this week in the opening part, it was me and him. And we're in a very close matchup that comes down to tonight's, I guess, a Monday night game. I don't even know who's playing. I just know that it comes down to tonight's game. And Seahawks, because I have a Seahawks running back. Yeah. And we were texting before. He has a Broncos kicker. So we were texting before this, and I was like, this motherfucker's gonna get in my head before. And as I looked down to read this poem, I saw it was 7:22, and I was like, the game's gonna start. It's just like, oh man, it's like I don't actually care. I don't really care. You know what I mean? I'm not that competitive anymore. I don't care, but it's like, oh man, he's in my head. I'm reading in his hometown. He's a successful doctor now, so he's doing better than I am. All the TV shows are about cops. You can always tell which police officer is supposed to be the cool one by the way the cigarette dangles between their cracked fingers, or by the way the cigarette smoke dances along a diamond ring, or by the platinum chain their badge swings from, by the whip they push through the back alleys they grew up on. You can tell the cool cop by how they know the older brothers of the dope boys and don't drop government names when yelling out a tinted window, how they keep the elbow angled just right when shooting ball, the way coaches who circled the hood taught them on a court lined with needles and broken glass. You can tell the cool cop by the way they eyeball a stash, don't even need to keep a scale, say, fuck the interrogation. There is no truth that doesn't reflect itself in blood. Can tell by the song that plays when they put the siren on top of the Benz, something you maybe heard sliding along the leather back seat of an OG's ride. Know the exact way to order a sandwich at the corner spot and who to ask for the dirt. It is so seductive to blur the line between beloved and executioner, not afraid to take the dirty money as long as people don't forget who ain't doing the bid kid behind a stray bullet. And I admit, back in the day, I loved the moment Carver leapt atop the Nissan Sentra in his black kicks and baggy jeans and offered a sermon of threats to the boys hiding somewhere in the concrete forest. The way his mouth undressed the slang in its familiar comforts when he yelled, "You do not get to win, we do." A thing is, I was sad this winter. Then again, I think I'm always operating at like a low hum of general sadness. There's like when NBA players miss games for general soreness. That's kind of like, if there were an injury report, mine would kind of be like, there were an injury report for writers. But of course, everyone was kind of like, well, daylight savings time is coming. There'll be more light and you'll be happier. And I was like, facts, that's proven to be true. And I think this year in particular, I was like, wait a minute, the sun's out, but I'm still kind of like a little sad. And I was like, what the hell, cursing at the sun? Here's a poem about that. I was told the sunlight was a cure for the cloak of despair thrown over our once bright and precious corners. But tell that to the lone bird who did not get the memo, dizzy and shouting into the newly familiar absence of morning light from atop a sagging branch outside my window, a branch which too was closer to the sky before falling into this chorus line of winter's relentless percussion, all of us victims to this flimsy math of ours. I was told there was a cure for this. I was told the darkness would surrender its weapons and retreat, but I know of no devils who evict themselves to the point of permanence. And yet, on the days I want to be alive, the sunlight leaves me stunned like a kiss from someone who is already twirled away by the time my eyes open. On the days I want to be alive, I tell myself I deserve a marching band, or at least a string section to announce my arrival above ground for another cluster of hours, or, if not a string section, at least one drummer and a loud-voiced singer well-versed in what might move me to dance, what might push my hand through a crowded sidewalk towards a woman who looks like a woman from my dreams, which means nothing if you dream as I do, everyone a hazy quilt of features only familiar enough to lead me through a cavern of longing upon my waking. And so, I declare, on the days I want to be alive, I might drag my drummer and my singer to your doorstep and ask you to dance. Yes, you who also survived the groaning machinery of darkness for another few months. You who, despite this, do not wish to be perceived in an empire awash with light in the sinning hours. We'll dance until our joyful heaving flows into breathless crying, the two of them often pouring out of the chess orchestra at the same tempo, siblings in their arrival. If I may correct my past desires, I want no horns to appear in the marching band of my survival. As a boy, I heard the news that it would be a trumpet ushering in the apocalypse, and I believed even myself, the angel of death, as I held my lips to a metal mouthpiece and blew out a tune about autumn. I am pressing your ear to my window and asking if you can hear the deep moans of the anguished bird and how the wind bends them into what sounds like a child clumsily pushing air into a trumpet for the first time. And that's the joke. Only a fool believes that the end of the world would sound sweet. All right. So, on to, thank you. I'm going to read a few things from, I'm having that thing happen where it feels like I've been on stage for an hour, but I've only been up here like 10 minutes. So I'm working on a book called, or I guess I'm still working on it. I turned in a draft of it. And I feel like anyone who's written a thing or produced a thing that requires getting edits back maybe understands this thing that happens where you turn in something and you're in that window of time where you're waiting to get edits back, and it feels great because you're like, this is perfect. I've written a perfect book and there are no notes. No notes will ever arrive. So that's where I am with this. As a preface, this my newest book of nonfiction is called There's Always This Year. It takes its title. Does anyone, I don't want to do the like I'm a teacher in school, but does that title ring a bell to anyone? Maybe not. I know we're in if I were in Cleveland, I read parts of this in Cleveland on Friday, and people were like, yeah, it's when the Cavs were in the 2016 finals, and they were down, their fans unfurled a banner in the stadium that said There's Always This Year. And when I first started writing this book, I was like, I want to write about what it is to make it out of a place, or to weigh the differences between who gets chosen to make it out of a place and who doesn't, centering LeBron James. I'm the same age as LeBron James, pretty much. I think he's got a few months on me, or I have a few months on him. We grew up playing basketball at the same time. He made it a little further than I did, due to both height and literally talent. And I thought I was writing a book about these kind of things encased in basketball, right? But then something happened in 2020 where I saw this video of LeBron on Instagram where his beard, I feel like in the season he dyes his beard because he's on TV all the time in vain, which is whatever, he's on TV all the time. But it was off season, his beard was very gray. And I remember thinking, oh man, LeBron is aging. And then it had a thing where it was like, oh no, wait, if he's aging, that means I'm aging. And there's a difference there because for me, my life was not always one that I thought would reach the point that it did in terms of actual linear time, right? And so I began writing a book instead about mortality and fear and embracing aging or embracing getting closer to a life that has more years behind it than in front of it, which, hopefully for me at least is not the case, but to begin to orient myself towards that. And so There's Always This Year began as this book that was about Ohio in the era of LeBron James, and it became this book that is steeped in grief and joy for a city that was, or joy for a city that was, grief for what a city has become, what it means to stay in a place, what it means to make a place, and what it means to eventually maybe die in a place. And so I'm going to read parts of this, some of which people have not heard before, and a couple parts people have, but we'll see how it goes. Where to begin? I did this thing where I just copied and pasted all my favorite parts into a big document. Okay. I'm going to read a little bit about bombs first. Cleveland was the most bombed city in America in 1976. That's all you need to know, I guess. In 1976, 36 bombs went off in Cleveland. The news dubbed it Bomb City, USA. Bombing itself wasn't new. The car bomb had long been one of the methods used to dispose of enemies. It left no evidence, but it was also loud, drew attention, and wasn't especially easy to execute. Pulling a trigger or even drawing a knife across the throat took less work, but also didn't always send a message. And in Cleveland, in 1976, power would be achieved by the sending of messages. So the city was alight with bombs through the summer, and then into the fall. Cars being transformed into hills of jagged and glowing metal, whatever bodies were inside of them sometimes rendered unrecognizable depending on the immediacy of the explosion. And all of this would happen out in the open, in broad daylight. The mob was becoming populated with younger, more reckless enforcers. When a city is rattled by explosion in an infinity cycle of retaliation so vicious it can hardly be remembered what its starting point or end goal is, even those who aren't targets become targets. A person walking next to a car that goes up in flames could become collateral if the explosion does enough damage. Fear screams through a city and rearranges its DNA, no matter how the scent of promise and jubilation spun through the air before it was torn by fear's screaming. The bomb relies on the trick we have turned over in our palms here many times already. The bomb relies on the fact that a person cannot see it coming, at least not the person who might most want to see it coming, the person with their name scrawled into the afterlife of its detonation. Even if you know yourself to be a target, even if you have stitched the kind of awareness into your DNA that comes with living through a city being torn apart by explosions, you will never know exactly when the flash of hot light will come for you. And I can only imagine if I were not me, but someone else, someone marked for death in a city humming with panic, I would simply embrace this lack of knowing. At first, I would maybe frantically check my car or underneath my porch in the mornings, and then I would have to give in to the fact that what was out to get me might just eventually catch me. Understanding what could come for you and being able to see it coming are two separate parts of the same machine, but I know what would allow me to put a key into an ignition without closing my eyes and holding my breath. I know what would allow me to sleep easy, or at least easy enough, what with sleep being the relative that shepherds us towards some eternal forest, garlanded with shadows. And I would like to pause here briefly to consider devotion, the kind of devotion it might take. For example, to extend your open palm so that someone you love or are otherwise beholden to might drop their car keys into your hand. The kind of devotion it might take, for example, to start a car that is not your car in a time and place where the car itself was a weapon and therefore the key nudged into the ignition was an extension of that weapon. What it might take for you to drive around a block a couple times knowing that someone, somewhere, not far from where your palms sweat against the steering wheel's leather, might be holding a small device with a single red button. And I know this isn't entirely romantic. I know that fear can also be one of devotion's many mothers, but maybe someone you have grown to love is more afraid than you are. And maybe you take their keys from them, pull them out of a hand without mentioning the hand shaking. I would like to consider the ways we all march towards our sometimes boring deaths without understanding what it is to be so devoted to someone or something that you might be compelled to speed up that march so that they can continue their own. I am not here to consider what is good or what is bad, but simply to consider what is sometimes necessary, even if I don't have the heart for it. I only have the heart for far inferior devotions. So does everyone I love. There maybe just aren't enough people who want us dead. I really have I'm not going to read about Buster Douglas, never mind. I was going to read a thing about Buster Douglas, but I really love Buster Douglas, and I have a big affection for him because, he's a Columbus guy, and I was a kid, like a little kid, when he knocked out Mike Tyson, and I remember that shit, like, really mattered, Like, I'm from East Columbus, and Buster Douglas from Linden, and like, people took off work the next day, like, people shut shit down because it mattered, And he came back. There's this story about how he came back to the city with the belts, the championship belts, and he just, like, is anyone here from Columbus? In, like, my age, maybe? I don't know if anyone remembers. But there's a story about how Buster Douglas, like, came back to Columbus with the belts and, like, walked through Linden and let the kids touch them because it was like, this is, like, nothing they've ever seen or had access to before. And that story, I don't know, there are a lot of points tonight where I might get very emotional. Like, I get very emotional thinking about this dude who, like, flew across the country to defeat, at the time, this, like, unbeatable person. And the first thing he did was come back to Columbus and, like, hold the belts out his car window so kids could touch them, I guess I'll read about it. Yeah. And I am from Ohio, which means everyone I roll with from this godforsaken state dreams himself an underdog. Me and my whole crew embrace the underdog shit, the narrative that might say we only matter during election years, and even then we gotta lie about who we really are just to get the country to give a damn. Fuck is a swing state that swallows the residents at its most vicious margins, but I'll embrace that lie too if it means I gotta fight my way up and out of something, even if that something is pulled from the depths of my imagination, a mirage of an opponent, like shadowboxing, dancing in the backyard while the sun pulls your dark shadow taller along the concrete. And speaking of boxing and underdogs, I am from Columbus, which means I am from a hood not far from where Buster Douglas trained, not far from Windsor Terrace, not far from where he bought a basketball state title back to Lyndon McKinley High in '77. And if you have been here with me before, here in the midst of some pages and paragraphs forcing the romantics out of such overwhelming violence, you might be saying, Buster Douglas here again? Yes, I'm sorry, he is, and he must be, because we are talking about underdogs, and we are talking about Ohio, and we are talking about who makes it out alive and who doesn't, and I still cannot get the mouthpiece of Mike Tyson skipping across the canvas out of my head. I still think about the moment when, instead of rising, Tyson fumbled for his departed mouthpiece, foolishly trying to clench it with his gloved hands, while a referee counted, kneeling alongside Tyson, almost tenderly, holding each ascending number as close as he could to the eye eyes of Tyson, whose own eyes wandered, fixating on the white crescent that had flown from his mouth. I still think about Douglas in disbelief, arms raised like he'd seen in the movies. I still think about my own home in disbelief. Me, at 7 years old, with school the next morning, given the gift of a late bedtime like all the other Columbus kids. I knew, even if none of our parents actually believed Douglas would win the fight, the optimism of a child's mind knows no boundaries, which is the first taste of how one becomes obsessed with the underdog when they don't outgrow the simplest realities of a circumstance. Maybe he'll just hit him hard, one good time, and he'll fall down, and that's it. Don't shit else matter if you come from where we come from, and you get to hold a belt over your head, get to bring it back to the hood and let the kids run their hands over it. There is some mercy in being an underdog and then thriving beyond anyone's wildest dreams of what you were capable of. And I know Douglas got his ass kicked by Holyfield, but no one I know gives a fuck about that. The history of an underdog can be distilled down to their brightest moment and then held on to forever. And this is why, in Ohio, so few people I know turned away from the Cleveland Cavaliers, even when it looked bleak at the end of Game 4, when it seemed like this would be another disappointment. But what if it wasn't? What if it is most comfortable against the ropes, the bruised and weary fighter, grinning in the face of the juggernaut, too arrogant to realize that it was always a trap? And what I believe to be true, and what absolutely must be true here, is that if you are a champion once, you are a champion always. No one can strip you of this. If you are a champion for a day, or an hour, or a few moonlit moments, you get to call yourself a champion, no matter how long you hold on to the belt, no matter if your fingers only graze the trophy as it gets passed along to the next victor. History may not ascribe the same gravity to every champion who has ever won anything, but history is hell on so many of us, and I am feeling generous today and always. I have felt like a champion before, even having won nothing but the desire to be alive in a day I woke up not wanting to be alive in. I deserve something for that, even if it is a parade of my own making, an invention, which is all the spoils of winning are anyway. Breathtaking inventions, to be sure, but inventions nonetheless. Years after he beat Tyson, Buster Douglas was asked in an interview when he knew he'd won, and Douglas said, "It was the pursuit of the mouthpiece that gave it away." Anytime you know you only got 10 seconds to get up, you ain't gonna worry about anything but getting up first. I guess I'll read two more. I don't know how much time I have, and I'm just like going. So, oh, don't say that. I would never do that. I can't. I forgot that I'm being like live streamed. I hope the writer who did this isn't watching, but they probably aren't. One time, I was at a reading. And that happened. Someone was like, "I don't know how much time I have left." And someone was like, "However long you want." The person was like, "All right." And they read for like 45 more minutes. And they had already read for 20 minutes. And so we're at, I was like, man, is this going to be like the Avatar movie? Yeah. All right, how long exactly? And so whenever people say, I'm always like, all right, that's a sign where it's like, I know I got to actually watch the time. Yeah, I'll read two more parts. One of them a bit sad, perhaps, but one of them for me is not sad at all. The thing that this book kind of revolves around is, well, I can't, never mind, I won't say that because it's a spoiler alert if I say that. But there's a trick that happens in this book about, I don't know how many other people dream like this, but truly a thing that's been fascinating me is that I cannot render, a lot of us can't render faces in our dreams, right? Or if we do, they're like vague. But a thing I found out when researching this book, we were talking about research and the weird places research takes you. A thing I found out while researching this book is that like your brain has a backlog of faces. Like every face you've ever seen is just like backlogged. And so it can be mapped onto anyone in a dream. That's why like faces and voices sometimes don't match. That's why it's which is horrifying to me. But I was fascinated by that. The fact that like there's a backlog of faces just waiting to, it's like every night it's like Internet Movie Database in your brain, and your brain is like, who's gonna star in tonight's horror? Depending on how you dream, I suppose I should speak for myself. All right. Scottwood is the name of the park that I grew up playing basketball at. That's all you need to know for this. And the other thing about faces and dreams is that there is nothing stopping the brain from delivering the face of an enemy to you in your sleep. And not only delivering the face of an enemy, but also building a world inside of which your enemy might, for a moment, be a lover, might be someone you would fight for, someone you would die for, someone who holds your arm tight as you swing from a cliff's edge. And when you look up, there is a face you know, a face you do not love but must love in that moment. And it is also true that the faces in a dream can be a combination of many faces, the eyes of the dead, gifted to the mouth, the voice of the living. It is easiest to convince myself of something that seems like love when no one looks like anyone, when anyone looks like everyone, when I wake and remember the shape of a mouth but never the words, sung out over crashing waves right before my arm was let go. There were actually 3 rims at Scottwood. Even in the utopian universe of the park, there was a hierarchy, the full court, which sat at the center of the park, and then off near the back beyond the never-used baseball field and near the school's exit, there was a single rim lording over a single, small half-court. This rim was never adorned with a net. Even at the start of summer, when the fresh nets were put on the other 2 rims, this old one was left naked, adorned only in the rust that had accumulated throughout the years. But this rim was where the kids played, the younger siblings, the cousins, the friends of friends, all of us too small or otherwise yet not yet ready to play on the full court with the older kids, but still in love with the game enough to want to fire the ball towards an unkempt halo of rust. And to pass the time, we'd take turns trying to beat an imaginary clock. Someone would throw a ball in the air and start counting down from 5 or maybe 10, depending on how far out the ball was thrown. And it was just you against time and nothing else. And all that mattered was that you made the shot before your crew howled out the noise that was supposed to sound like a buzzer at the end of the game, but most often sounded like a choir of birds strangled by clouds and screeching on their descent to earth. And yes, it was best if the shot slipped through the rim, but it could be argued that there was also magic in the shots that missed, at least for how that missing would invite the orchestra of laughter, high-pitched and uneven but still sweet. The axis upon which success in pleasure tilts is flimsy, and some days I would have rather failed but been in awe of the rapturous joy I got to fold into with my crew, boys who were not yet big enough or good enough to play on a court where the games mattered. And so we made our own game, one where we could be small and inconsequential gods, architects of the miraculous, miss enough shots, and when one falls, time slows and bliss becomes elastic. We would hold our follow-throughs, our fingers extended and frozen towards the sky, though not like Mike. We loved MJ, but there were Michael Jordans on our block. There were Michael Jordans walking among us, Jordans 4 houses down, Jordans at the bus stop. If I hadn't made it clear yet, let it be known that some of us never once dreamed of leaving. Never thought about making it out of any place as glorious as this. Tell me if you have ever built a heaven out of nothing, and then tell me what it would take for you to look for a new one somewhere else. The people who circle this heaven from the outside wouldn't know this, might think that everyone is trying to make it somewhere through ball, through music. That's another myth. Crack rock or jump shot, courts and cages and caskets, everyone getting out one way or another, or some might say, some with no imagination, who speed through the hood, who speculate about sneakers ornamenting telephone poles, who read stories of gunshots dragging serenity from the arms of nighttime, some who imagine a place with no fathers, who, relying on that myth, believe mothers and grandmothers incapable of the type of ferocious affection that might pull a child back from any ledge they run towards. I never wanted to be anywhere other than where I was, my 2 feet planted on concrete that was breaking, but still satisfied to be of use. I never wanted to stray far from the shitty speakers weighing down old trunks, the symphony of bass and rattling metal, the smoke that drifts from an open window, an arm swinging from it, a wrist dangling out the side, a gold bracelet on that wrist, the sunlight running its fingers along the links, the shine of it echoing for blocks. My people are here, and my people built the here in their image, and at least for a few precious years there was nowhere to make it out of. We built the impossible utopia. You can't see the fence, but it's there. It'll keep you out too if you don't come correct. The gangs were never our enemies, but the people who look upon where we stay and see gangs in every gathering certainly were our enemies. But I ain't never going to complain about who doesn't come around. If that's what it takes, then yes, gang everywhere. A gang of stars mobs the infinite cloudless black. A gang of black blooms infinite through a mob of dripping light, which reflects off the sweat mobbing the skin off the black kids who should be home but are instead ganged up on the dying summer. The night itself, sweating out a gang of shouts to swallow the gang of sirens, the echo of a ball fired off a backboard, moms the silence which was hardly ever silence around here anyway. A whole gang of porches and mobs of good folks set atop them, a gang of shoes or bare feet stomping the old wood, beckoning a mob of dust to fly skyward before settling right back down where it was, where it's always been. The homie leans back in the grass while a gang of fireflies decorate the absence above our heads, and he says, I'm gonna have me a gang of kids, and my kids gonna have a gang of kids, and we ain't never leaving. We're gonna own a whole block of houses right here in the hood. Understand this. Some of our dreams were never your dreams and will never be. When we were young, so many people I loved just wanted to live forever where we were. And so yes, if you are scared, stay scared. Stay far enough away from where our kinfolk rest so that a city won't get any ideas. They will burn down or build over a neighborhood for nothing. Doesn't matter how many stars are built or born on a cramped court. Doesn't matter who gets a court or a community center named after them. But trust, there are more of us, always, whole gang of us. Some of us carved our name in the trees, in the wet concrete of new sidewalks. Some of us took small knives to metal and wrote our names into the death traps of the playground, and so we stay one way or another. We will never make it out, and we never disappear. Permanence is the greatest stunt of them all. All right, one more thing, and I'm going to read one more thing about baldness and hair. And my dad, and LeBron James. I have to say again, like it's, thank you so much for being here. I see so many people who are familiar faces who I adore. My pal TC in the back, I see you, fam. I have 2 large pieces of art that TC made in my house, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you. And I like to have no one here, I was about to say for those who have been in my house, but no one here has been in my house. But for anyone who has been in my house, they're always like, you don't have any kind of there's no artistic consistency. But it's because, what I most want is things that remind me of people I love and have loved and will love. And TC, gosh, there's this beautiful Baldwin piece that I it's one of the first things I see every morning, and it grounds me. And so, sorry to put TC on the spot, but beyond that, there's so many people I see here who I love and care for, and people who I have not met yet who I cannot wait to care for. And I'm saying all this now because I imagine I'll be very emotional directly after reading this piece. And after, I guess we're doing questions, right? Okay, so one thing I always say is you can ask me whatever you want, doesn't have to be about anything I read, but it certainly can be. But folks who know me, and I know some people here do know me, know I'll talk about anything. I'll talk about sneakers or sports or music or whatever. But I want to say that being here is a real pleasure. And I love Ohio so much. And I hope I've done well. Islands of gray have begun to form on the beard of LeBron James and have started to grow towards each other, uninterrupted, reaching for each other through the once black hair. You can notice it best in the off-season, depending on the light he's in, or maybe how long it's been since he's gotten a beard trim, how long the grays have had permission to flourish without bowing to the sharp edges of a blade. In a clip that circulates on Instagram, LeBron is standing on the sideline at his son Bronny's game, shouting out instructions lovingly. His beard is long, and the lighting in the arena is dancing upon it in a way that highlights the patches of gray that are harder to spot when he's in season, when he's seemingly more aware of the fact that he's on television more than most people. And it is a strange miracle to be able to trace your own aging, your own mortality through someone who is living alongside you, someone who has survived eras at the same time as you have in some of the same places. LeBron's face was as bare as my own when I first heard his name, and it is impossible to believe that any of us ever looked like children. Not that we were children, of course. I believe that I was a child once. The cloak of time has yet to grow so long that I have surrendered my childhood, my shouts thrown into the air like knives just to hear my own symphony cutting through the night sky and return to me in small slivers of echo, the lightning bugs who surrendered lazily to my open palms for a few moments before flicking their bodies on and off and then flying away again, the tree branches that sighed against the fresh arrival of my weight but still did their best to hold me. I believe that I was a child once because I am afraid today. There are parts of me that might die soon. Parts of my memory that might drift to a distance too far for me to get back. And because I know myself to be afraid of this, that is all I need to believe that I was once a child. But it is hard to believe that we ever looked like children. Even when the people I love, fresh from a trip back home, excitedly pull me close to unfurl photos of them when they were babies or preteens or even disaffected high school goths or punks or jocks or drama kids. Even when my best friend shows me a video of her toddler making the same exhausted and delightfully scolding face that I have seen adult her make many times through many years, clearly a transference of the divine. It is still hard for me to believe that anyone I know now was ever physically not who they are. And I do not say this to submit the aesthetics of childhood to a nefarious algorithm. I am not suggesting that I do not see children as children, that when the black boys on my block zip through the streets on their bikes, I don't stop myself from shouting some concerned correctives at them, the way elders did for me. I am talking instead about our past selves, the way romantics have failed my own clear memory. I remember LeBron James as a 14-year-old, skinny and seemingly poured into an oversized basketball uniform that always suggested it was one quick move away from evicting him. But even with what I know, even in photos, his face blurs into the face it is now, the face that ages alongside my own. And conventional wisdom says that we look to our elders to find the footprints leading us towards what we might look like as elders ourselves. And I last sat down to dinner with my father 5 years ago and watched how sincerely and intently he spoke with his hands, the way they would slice through the air, the way they would sometimes make the shape of the word, cup themselves towards the sky and make the shape of a bowl, well before my father would finish describing what once held a soup he missed tasting. His hands always moved while he spoke, seeking to animate the language of a story or a lesson or a monologue, and I hadn't noticed this about him until I noticed it about myself, that it was something I would find myself apologizing for. Yes, I am sorry for what has been passed down to me without my knowing, what has just shown up at the doorstep and found its way in. My father and I probably also have the same smile, though it would be hard for me to know because I don't smile enough to trace it through any kind of consistency. But one thing that is for sure is that my father and I have two different hairlines. Mine, gracefully, thankfully, still intact. And I pray to whatever gods oversee such matters of self-indulgence to keep it intact for at least a little while longer. But it is true that small clusters of gray stars have begun to make their way through my otherwise dark solar system. When the light shines down on me from above in the bathroom mirror, I notice them slightly peeking through the top of my head. In the rearview mirror while driving, I look up and there is a small curved gray hair unmistakably hanging down from the edge of my hairline. At first, it was jarring, something I believed was happening to me. Even though the grays have not yet overrun my head and beard, I still found myself wondering how to remove them, pick them out one by one, even against the advice of my beloved barber at the time, who was an old black man with a head covered in gray, who I went to because he cherished the hair on his head. And you must find a barber who cherishes the hair on their own head slowly, thoughtfully, and carefully, so that they might, if you are lucky, extend that kindness towards your own head. And this barber told me never to pull the gray weeds from the dark forest, for they might simply grow back with a newfound ferocity and anger at their removal. He told me, you don't want to make an enemy out of the grays, he said one day while lining me up. Best to just thank them for showing up to the party. Lucky you got a party for them to show up to. And there has been much made about the fading of LeBron James's hair, all largely uninteresting jokes, or at the very least, jokes that are immensely predictable. LeBron himself doesn't acknowledge it much in any explicit manner, which is probably for the best. Even in the early points of his NBA career, anyone who knew hairlines well enough, who maybe checked their own for signs of vulnerability, knew that LeBron's hair wasn't long for its more youthful state. There have been moments in his career where he seemed to try to revive his hair, to mask the portions of it fading along the top and back of his head. There are those who have, in their incessant joking, insisted that LeBron just go bald, give in to what the hair itself seems to be demanding. But enough. Enough. If you are someone who is from a place not everyone made it out of, or if you have been to enough funerals where parents or grandparents weep over the caskets of their babies and grandbabies, if you know forever is a hand dealt by an uncertain dealer, you may wear the signs of your aging like thick, heavy gold, weighing the body down but still stunning, unavoidable in its shine. Lord, the clouds atop the fields of my life are so thin now. The sky is bare and pummeling all that rests below. Lord, the gray won't stop coming, and for once my arms are open to it. Lord, I have lived long enough to look like my father, though I might fight it. I have lived long enough to cut through the air with my own hands, to trim the long hair of the Midwest wind, to make the shape of a bowl when telling a story about something sweet I once held and can still taste. Lord, release me from whatever might make me wish for the way I looked as a child, which I can hardly remember, through this beautiful fog of mortality, this slow march to the kingdom. Lord, when Tyler left us, his hair was so long and dark, I would still find tiny ropes of it around my apartment for months after the funeral, when the judge sentenced Brandon with not a single line yet woven into his furrowed, boyish brow to 30 years in a cage, and his mother whispered, "He'll be so old when he gets out." I know what was unspoken on the other side of that was, and what will become of me in the meantime. Yes, Lord, I come to you today, pleading for all the aches of age, all the permanent and immovable damage you have to offer. Yes, there are moments I have spent and will continue to spend in a mirror, massaging products onto my skin and slowly washing them off, if not to delay the very things I am now welcoming, at least to make them as luminous as possible. But do not be fooled by the weapons I refuse to lay down. I come to you today with gratitude and knowing the fight cannot be won. Let the hair turn its drab colors and perhaps slowly begin to depart down the drain. Let the pain in the knee linger as a reminder that movement might one day come with a price if I am lucky enough to make it that long. Yes, Lord, I am thankful again today for every reminder of how I have outlived my worst imagination. I will walk slowly through the garden of all that could have killed me, but didn't. And when the world has grown weary with indulging our foolish living, I hope to not be alive for whichever apocalypse is the one that ends humanity, but if I am alive for it, I hope that it takes me out early. I do not wish to be alive in the aftermath of the world ending. The movies and television shows don't make it look appealing, what with all the scavenging and the hard surfaces and the need to be proficient with multiple forms of weaponry and alert at all times. Survival, sure. But when the world suggests it might be done with us, I have no interest in pouring myself into rebuilding it. But one thing I would crave is the silence, the emptiness of it all. In the spring of 2020, when I thought the world was doing a dress rehearsal for the apocalypse, the only thing that comforted me was the silence, knowing that a city would otherwise be flooded with shouts and sounds, and yet was forced to restrain itself. There was a window of time in this moment, when people were still too stunned to spend any time outdoors, and before the parks decided to take away the basketball hoops and lock the gates and barricade the playgrounds. And in that window of time, I would grab a ball and go to the court alone. I loved most when the world felt newly bald. If you have ever gone from having hair one day to waking up without it the next day, you might be familiar with the gestures of disbelief, the repeated touching, the returns throughout an hour or a day, the shock when a breeze first dances upon your new nakedness. The world felt like that to me then. I would walk into it tentatively astonished by the quiet until I let it envelop me. And on the basketball courts alone, there was nothing to contain the shattering echo of the ball's dance with the concrete. I love a sport where even when I am alone, I am not alone. And I am maybe a bit ashamed to say that I also love basketball for the violence of its sounds, the way a ball sounds when it ricochets off a metal hoop that has been worn down by the seasons, the way that a ball, when it rips through a net, might sound the way a thin leather belt sounds being lashed across bare skin by a parent who sometimes might have been one of our worst enemies, but only sometimes. And this is how I came back to what I considered might be the end of life as I knew it. Alone on a court at the arrival of spring while the world was locked indoors, until one day the rims vanished, not just at my most beloved park, but at all the parks. I drove around the city frantically, ball in the passenger seat, looking for anywhere that still might have a rim fastened to a backboard, and they were all gone overnight in a place where suddenly so few people were surviving well. I was asking myself again how I might survive, and I know. It might seem like this has all been about absence, but do you see it now? Absence, maybe, but absence requires an understanding of what should be, what was once. It has always been about impermanence. Impermanence was the altar I was leading us to this entire time. The altar that right now we are kneeling before. My hand on your shoulder, as it has always been. A promise is a foolish thing to make, but here is one last one. This is not a story about heroes. Not everyone will die. No one will live forever. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I can tell by that resounding applause you all enjoyed yourself as much as I did. So this is amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Hanif. Everyone, my name is Tim Barr. I'm the host of the Urban Consulate, Cincinnati. With the Urban Consulate, we host monthly conversations here at the Mercantile Library to discuss community, equity, and change here in this city of Cincinnati. So we're so honored to be partnering with Mercantile Library, with Wordplay Cincy, as well as Downbound Books to have Hanif here. And so I'll stop talking. I'm sure all you guys got some questions you want to ask Hanif, but I did want to come up here and introduce myself. And I do believe we have a question from our online audience that Kira's going to kick off for us.
Yes, Gabrielle asked, I wanted to know if there is an album or songs that Hanif feels could be a soundtrack for his new book.
Thank you for that question. I feel like the Above the Rim soundtrack did it already. There's a version of SWV's Anything that is on the Above the Rim soundtrack that is not the version that's on like the SWV album. I love that version. Like I like SWV a lot, but that version of they were one of those groups where we don't have to get into the whole like 90s R&B thing, but I feel like SWV really was one of those groups that benefited from the era of the remix. So that's one song. I also, Jid's new album, probably. Because I think there's maybe a relentlessness to his performance of language that I used as a blueprint for this book. Well, not him, but I don't know. I think we met each other in the middle. But also, does anyone like Stacey Ladisaw? Does anyone know Stacey Ladisaw? Let Me Be Your Angel is like, weirdly a song that I listen to get in the zone to write every morning when I was working on this book, because there's something about the crescendo of that song that you enter it clean and you exit it cleaner, you know? And so that's that's another one. Shout out to Stacey Ladisaw, who has not made music. I mean, she retired in like 88. I miss her. Bring her back. Justice for Stacey Ladisaw.
Thank you, Kira. So if you guys just raise your hands, Kira and I will bring the mic to you.
That's
right
a long
behind you,
walk.
Kira.
You might have to come up.
Yeah, behind you.
Oh, there's one back. I was gonna say, if you walk, I was gonna say,
no,
fam.
There's definitely one in the back.
2 rapid fire questions. You're a sneakerhead, right? So can you name the designer that worked on most of Jordan's shoes?
Tinker Hatfield.
Absolutely. Your top 3 Jordan styles.
White Cement Jordan 4 is one. I get a new pair every new year. My first purchase is a pair of White Cement Jordan 4.
Like
so,
that.
The Concord Jordan 11, even though.
Classic.
Yeah, but there's something about the Jordan, even though I'm like literally wearing a pair of Jordan 11s, there's something about the Jordan 11 that's just like an impractical silhouette, because like the patent leather is so close to the dirt, you know?
Facts.
I don't know. So the patent leather Jordan, the Concord Jordan 11, and I'm torn between, like, the conventional wisdom is the Jordan 1, the
For
bread
sure.
Jordan 1. But
Multi-purpose.
I really love the black cement Jordan 3. I adore it. I don't wear it a lot because the toe box crease is really easy, right? So like anytime even if you like walk like a normal human being, the toe box, you know what I mean? Like the toe box in the Jordan 3 creases. And so like when I wear them, I feel like I'm like just
I
I'm
feel
like
that.
sliding backwards across the ground.
I'm glad you put a 3 in there though. Like that
I do
silhouette
love a
is.
3.
Yeah. Yeah. Highly rated, highly respected.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go with the Jordan 1, if anybody cares.
Do you have a certain colorway you like in the Jordan 1?
I like the Chicago red and black.
I also, so we don't have to do a whole sneaker thing, but I'm like an obsessive sneaker collector, and so I collect like originals too, and so I have 2 pairs of Jordan 1s from like 1985 and 1984, and I have a pair of the Chicago ones. There's the black toe Chicago ones from 1985. There's that iconic photo of Jordan on a basketball court with the Jordan 1 black toes around his neck. He never really wore them, but I have a pair of those in like at the top of my sneaker shelf, and I wore them one time, and I was like, these have one more wear in them before they fall apart. You know, because a shoe that old, like, it's going to crumble. And I was like, I can tell these have one more wear in them before they crumble. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm probably never going to get married, you know, like, but if I ever do, you know, that's the one. No, not the shoe. I'm not going to marry the shoe. I mean,
That's the one.
I would wear the shoe to a hypothetical wedding. Which now everyone is learning why I'm single.
So I think anyone who reads you or follows you probably would share my admiration for your generosity for other artists and just the joy and appreciation that you're constantly expressing for other people's work. And so as a bookseller, it was really exciting for me when I learned a while back that you were going to be acquiring books with Tin House.
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear maybe a little bit about what your plans are, and I was really hoping that you could tell us a bit about the Prince Shakur book that's coming out in just a few weeks.
I'm so proud of Prince. You know. Prince Shakur does anyone know Prince Shakur's writing in here? Prince is a young writer and activist from Columbus, and anyone who knows me knows even a little bit, I'm a Toni Morrison disciple, huge Toni Morrison disciple. Miss Morrison means the world to me, and the imprint she left, you know, and her mission as an editor, of course her path is different than mine, she edited before she wrote, but her path as an editor was to take chances on books that would otherwise not have a chance to take them. So I called Prince. When I got the first thing I did when I signed the Tin House contract, I was like, Prince, man, what you got? He's like, well, I sent my book to Tin House, and they said no, like a couple months ago. And I was like, but I wasn't there then. And I was like, we're gonna make something of this book. You know, he turned it in, and I was like, this is my goal. To say this is as short a way as possible. I don't really care if the book is a finished, polished book. The work of the editor is not to say I acquired a finished, polished book, and here it is. For me, the work I wanted to take on the work of editing. I wanted to be rigorous because I care about writing and I care about writers. I care about black writers specifically. And for Prince, like a young black queer writer who had gotten this memoir turned down a lot because people were expecting some kind of like miraculous finished product, and when the answer was there, the work, I read that book and I was like, there is enough beautiful language in here. We can make something together. And I watched Prince transform that book. I watched Prince like section by section transform that book into something miraculous. And I'm a better writer because of that. And it's so beautiful. And I know I've gotten emotional a lot tonight, but it's really something to watch someone relearn how to believe in themselves and to be an audience to that and to be a witness to that. I don't know. Prince is so gifted, and I'm so glad that people are going to get to see his work. And please go pre-order that book, buy that book. It's called When They Tell You to Be Good. It's about coming of age and his Jamaican heritage and coming of age during Standing Rock Uprising. And yeah, in the second book, I guess I can say this now because the contract was signed today. I acquired a writer named Athena Dixon, has a book called Sonder that's about disappearance, a series of essays about various modes of disappearance, and that's book number 2 under my Tin House umbrella. And I get 3 a year, and so I'm kind of in this panic mode now where it's like, I got 1 more left, and I'm bad at acquiring books. I'm very good at like editing, but acquiring is wild because I think about it as I do sports or competition where I'm like, I gotta get the book that I love. I gotta just wait for the book that I love. And in the meantime, I'm like passing over books that I like a whole lot. I don't know. But I have 1 more left. Fingers crossed that I make up my mind to get one, but it's been a dream to work for Tin House. I owe them a lot. I'm learning a lot, and I'm a better writer because I get to work with talented writers.
Well, I'm going to ask a question.
Yes.
So you've spoken a couple times in your poetry about kind of like the end of the world and, anticipating that. But
Yeah.
taking a step back from that, what is your hope for the future? What is one hope that you have for the future as a writer, as an artist?
Okay. This is a good question. This is a really needed question. I appreciate it because it's forcing me to. I don't think I'm that, critics might say I'm too cynical. I don't think I'm that cynical. I think I'm a romantic. I'm very much a romantic, but I am also maybe a bit of a cynic, which I suppose can make me hard to love on every level of affection. Familial, platonic, all of it. But my hope for the future is that there is one. But beyond that, I really am into the idea of equity for writers and artists who just have an idea. I started this thing called 6805, which is kind of hard to explain, and I won't bore people with it, but essentially, thanks. Thanks for the few of you who are 6805 fans. 6805.com if you want to read a bunch of essays on music albums. But I did it because I was like, I want to read people telling me what they love about an album, one album that means the world to them. And I'll pay them some money, and I just want to have an archive of writing because I think that there are, and it wasn't like you have to be a published writer, you have to have this, it was just like straight up, one time I was at Whole Foods in Columbus, and the person who was behind the cash register was like, yo, I'm a fan of your writing, and I love 6805. And I was like, you got an album you like? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, hit me up. And he's on the site because he was like, I like this album and I want to talk about it. Yeah. So my hope for the future is that there's more sites of that kind of thing where there is the whole point of perhaps I'm not naive about what my career has afforded me. I used to be perhaps, but I'm not naive about that. And so perhaps because I've gotten to this place, I can trick people, I can trick people who otherwise might consider themselves gatekeepers, and I can make the gates invisible just by saying, I'm here and I believe in this person. I mean, Prince Shakur is a great example of that, where Tin House was like, we don't want this book. And then I showed up with it and I was like, I want this book. And they were like, all right. And so, but one shouldn't have to win a fucking MacArthur to command that, So that is my hope. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now they're flowing. Now we're at the point where the questions are flowing. I love it. Let's get it. Let's get it.
Hey, Hanif. What are your thoughts on the hell is real sign?
I love it. I genuinely love it. It's also, I don't know. I was raised Muslim. And I don't know if anyone's raised Muslim here, but, hell is a more threatening thing. I feel like in the Quran, it's the worst possible hell. So I'm I felt like at a very early age, I understood hell as a reality. But the sign itself, I like it. I think it's a beautiful landmark. I love that it is one of the things that defines now a budding soccer rivalry. I mean, folks who know me know I've been a Columbus Crew fan since '96, my whole life. I was going to wear a Crew kit tonight, but I was like, I don't want it. It doesn't. That would be, I don't really wear sports jerseys at this point in my life if I'm not going to a game. And so I feel to go out of my way to rub in a thing, it's just I'm an adult now. It's one of those things where it's I don't necessarily dislike FC Cincinnati. I feel that's the other thing with me is that rivalries just don't impact me the way they used to. People in Columbus are every Michigan week they go around and put red tape on all the M's around town. I'm like, God, it's fucking exhausting. You got someone trying to tear down the Michigan Avenue sign in Harrison West, and it's give it a rest. So I do love the Hell is Real sign. It's a beautiful landmark. I've taken beautiful photos of it, if I do say so. One of the photos I've taken of the Hell is Real sign was an album cover earlier this year. I forgot the name of the band, but they hit me up and they were like, we use this photo as an album cover. I was like, Sweet. I took that photo while driving 70 miles an hour. Don't do that.
So my question is, it's two questions. One, can you describe the time in your life where you realized that you could make a living as a writer? And the second question is, have you ever doubted that?
Yeah, well, what I doubt perpetually now is there's this euphoria that comes with completion of a poem for me, where I'm like, I cannot believe that I did that again. And then that euphoria turns into anxiety, where it's like, I can't believe that I might have to do that from scratch all over again. So every day, this book, at the end of every good sentence, if I wrote a good run of sentences, I would say, unbelievable that I did that. And then I would say, how am I going to find that much good language again? And so doubt is something. I'm not that competitive anymore. I grew up I was an athlete growing up. I played sports growing up, and so much of my competitiveness got massaged out of me. But I do find these things of, at the end of the day, as writing, I think about it's still just me in the gym. In the mornings these days, when it's nice out, I go out to the court, Blackburn Park on the east side of Columbus, and I shoot however many jump shots it takes for me to make 50. Some mornings I hit 10 or 12 in a row, and I'm like, it's going to be a good morning. And some mornings I miss my first 15, and I think I should go home. But writing is similar, where I think it's just me in the gym and no one else. And some days I'm going to make it look good, and some days I don't. So when I first thought I could make a living as a writer, I quit my 9-to-5 job in 2017. And I did it after I'd saved up enough money to pay, I was working at MTV News and writing the bulk of the essays that would become, well, not the bulk, but some of the essays that would become They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us. My dear friend, is Brett still here? They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us, which is turning 5 in November, and $2 Radio is putting out a 5-year anniversary copy of it I'm really excited about, came to life because my pal Brett, who I knew from a band, we ran in similar circles, and he was in a band called Emily and the Complexes, which were very good. They're now disbanded, but they were very good. Brett emailed me and was just like, do you want to make, in 2016, do you want to do an essay book? And I was like, no, not interested. I put out one book of poems. I only ever wanted to write one book. The Crown Ain't Worth Much was going to be my one book, and I was done. And Brett had got on me about $2 Radio, and I decided to do They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us. And I was working at MTV News, I was doing freelance writing and working a 9-to-5. I saved up enough money to pay my rent for a year, and I walked away from my 9-to-5 job. And I paid my rent, my landlord, I still remember, I called my landlord, I was like, listen, I'm gonna just give you a year of rent right now, today. And he was like, cool. Because I knew if I kept the money in my bank account, you know what I mean? I was like, I'm gonna just write you a check, man, I'm paying you all the rent right now. After that happened, a month after that happened, MTV News laid us all off. And freelancing kind of just went on a down spell for me. And I was like, I got to start applying for jobs. I'm gonna just chill out and live casually because my rent's paid, but things are getting bad. But then They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us happened. And that book changed my life. very literally changed my life. I struggle with that book because it was written during a really hard time for me. But the impact that it's had for all these years is just, I'm really grateful for it. People to this day are still reading it and sharing it and all that. It's mind blowing. So thank you, Brett.
I take it from your bio, where you list where you went to high school, that you did not go to college.
I did. I went to Capital University.
Oh, yeah. You did? Okay.
I just don't care about it.
You don't, so it's not important enough to mention. Okay. Gotcha. High school's more important. Okay. Well, I was just wondering well, never mind my question then.
No, what was your question?
Well, no, my question was, thinking if you didn't go to college, would that be a good thing for your writing, or a bad thing for your writing, or something you had to make up for, or something that freed you? But
I like that. I'll answer the portion of that question of something I had to make up for, because I love that part, because it is, even though I have no quote-unquote formal education in writing, never studied writing on any level, so that was something I had to make up for. Especially, I talked about this when I was at Wordplay, I had to kind of create my own workshop of poetry, like reading poetry and learning how to write poetry. I got a bunch of books and locked myself in my room for like a year just reading poems, right? I taught myself some discipline, some rigorous discipline through that. So yeah, that was something I had to make up. That was a path I had to learn on my own, and I'm actually really thankful for it.
Yeah. Well, I thought about that when you were talking about the guy at Whole Foods. And,
Yes.
you know, that you don't have to go to the Iowa workshop to be a writer, and you probably are a very different writer than people who do have a formal education.
Also, I guest taught at the Iowa workshop in January and February 2020 before the pandemic, and it was not for me. I'm learning to be even more charitable than I already try to be. It was not an experience that I enjoyed.
Who are some of the poets who influenced you, and who should we be looking out for? Who are some up-and-coming poets, or some that we've slept?
Yes. So poets that influenced me, I have a long tree. I think about influence as a tree, right? So Robert Hayden is just massive for me. Robert Hayden is just, if I were to make this like a family tree, binaries be damned, but for the sake of this exercise, to make a family tree, my poetry grandfather would be like Hayden, and my poetry grandmother would be Miss Gwendolyn Brooks. And then from there, we get to folks like Rita Dove, Ohioan, Ross Gay, Ohioan. The first poem, I told this story in Wordplay, so I won't tell it in depth again, but the first poem I read that I loved, that I felt like I could duplicate to make my own, was Adrian Matika's poem, Maggot Brain, about Eddie Hazel. And so Matika's still a hero of mine. Map to the Stars is one of my favorite books of all time. Mary Oliver, who I talked extensively about at Wordplay. The poet Terrence Hayes. God, one of my favorite opening poems in a book ever is the poem What It Looked Like, that Terrence Hayes opens How to Be Drawn With. I just love that poem. So I think about it all the time. And then to think about some folks who are more my contemporaries, Safia Ahio is like a dear sibling of mine and someone who I just learned from all the time. And I just read a book I loved I read it all the time, the poet Marianne Chan, Marianne Chan might be in Cincinnati. She is. Yeah. Gosh, hope she's not here. I'd be embarrassed to be like, but All Heathens is like one of my favorite books of all time. It just dawned on me that she's in Cincinnati. All Heathens is like the book for me. It's one of the books that the poet Golden, who just came out with a book called A Dead Name That Learned to Love Itself. I adore that book. I think it's like fresh out. Like I just got copies of it like last week. The poet Matt Mitchell, who's up in Cleveland. Yeah, a lot of young poets who I think are really challenging form and genre and things like that.
Cool. First of all, thank you, man. I personally enjoyed the Buster Douglas poem.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate you. I know it was kind of some hesitancy about whether you want to read it or not, but I personally appreciate it because I come from a city, originally Louisville, Kentucky, and so we have a champion, a boxing champion. You have the champion. Yeah, Muhammad Ali, right? Yeah. And so, but like we have that one, and so there's this affinity to being connected to a hero like that, right? And I remember when I was 7 and I met Muhammad Ali for the first time and I shook his hand and I did a typical thing that a kid does and says, yo, I'm never washing his hand again, right? Yeah. What I enjoyed about that poem particularly is like how you guided the listener to this element of the mouthpiece and how you just kind of just dangled it in front of us. And you created so much narrative and so much color around that, which really prompts me to ask about your creative process and how, I know earlier you said there's a bit of research involved to it, but I know there's like this, there's this spirituality in how words flow through you, and I'm curious to know how does it feel when you know that like you found that word or you found that hook? And so I guess my question is really centered around the creative process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think what really sets off bells for me is, have I found the moment that I can refashion into something? So the mouthpiece moment, I mean, that Buster Douglas section of the book is much longer, and I only read sections of it. But I saw that Buster Douglas interview, the thing he said about Tyson reaching for his mouthpiece and being like, well, when you get knocked down, like, you know you've got someone if they're not trying to get back up, you know? And that was the thing, that was a template for the whole thing. And so the mouthpiece became the image that I knew I could ride on, because the mouthpiece represents more than a mouthpiece, right? It represents a border between triumph and failure. It represents a border between pain and losing even. Those are two different things. The axes, they turn on two different axes. And so I'm always looking for the one thing that I can kind of stretch out as far as I can. Because then it's not a matter of language, it's a matter of how long can I get you to focus on this image? If I just keep returning it, if I keep nudging you with it. The idea of being nudged by a mouthpiece is kind of gross in this instance, but if I can keep like nudging you with the repeated image, so much so that you know and trust that it's going to return, then you'll stay. You'll stay because you'll say, I just want to see where this is going. This is going somewhere further than it is right now. And so much of my creative process is trying to trick people, you know? Or to use a sports metaphor, trying to keep the ball in my hand, like dropping back to pass and trying to keep the ball in my hand for as long as I can before I let it go, and seeing if I can evade the oncoming defenders in the process. The oncoming defenders in this scenario are usually my own brain, but some days it works better than others. Hi.
All right, I have to stand because in order to ask you this, I need to sway around a little bit because I'm nervous.
Wait, can I say something? You were back there.
Yeah.
You have on great boots.
Oh, thank you.
I can't see them from the white boots.
They're white. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When I was back there doing my like nervous meditating type thing, and I looked up, I had like my eyes closed, and I looked up and I was like, those are good boots.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I just wanted to ask you, you talk about things like hip hop and rap music and sneaker culture and what it means to grow up as a black boy to black man in Columbus and in Ohio. And you come from such a genuine perspective. But as your work starts to get bigger, I was just kind of curious, like at the end of the day, you're writing from someone with experience in Ohio, and as you kind of mentioned, it's a swing state that isn't really swinging the other way anymore. So how do you kind of balance writing about what it means to be in a black body in Columbus, Ohio, or all of Ohio, while also looking at our state government and not seeing a single person of color? Especially as you start to reach other audiences outside of Ohio who maybe are only familiar with the state as cornfields and a lot of white people. I'm just kind of curious, like how you balance your experience with the expectations of people approaching your work.
That's a good question. There are two answers I have. One is that I have I have divested from a reliance on, I have mostly divested from expectations of government. And so I don't even think about, I grew up in a community on the east side of Columbus that was neglected to a point where the people there loved themselves in a way that was a type of governing, right? We governed ourselves out of care. No one called the police on kids because there was someone on that block that all of us feared more than the police, right? And you called them. This is to say that that in and of itself, my understanding of the world through that lens, it's not just about writing about being black in Ohio, it's about writing about being a very specific kind of black growing in a very specific kind of way in a very specific kind of a city that, sure, maybe does mirror some experiences that other folks have had in other places, but when I do that, my expectations are really low in terms of who I'm appealing to and what they find appealing in the work. Now, I am also aware of the fact that my work incites a certain type of interest in a very certain type of Ohio. And one thing that's real is that Ohio has a long history of brilliant writers, right? And so I am certainly not the only one, and I'm not even like Jackie Woodson was also born on the east side of Columbus. So when people are like, how does it feel to be the most notable writer in Columbus? It's like, I'm not even the most notable writer from my own literal corner of Columbus, right? This is to say that I operate in a lineage of writers that is the government I turn towards. And because of that, what I think I am angling for is an understanding of the world that is multidimensional and as multitudinous as most of the black people I know and have grown up around, but doesn't expect anything from anyone outside of the bubble that I know, right? There's a fly on it's no longer on my nose. And I think that's how I make it. I mean, that's how I kind of put my head down and do it. And one thing that's real is that while I know I said the thing about not being naive about where my career is, I actually don't think I still kind of write for the same handful of people I wrote for when I was, when I look at audience, I still think about writing to impress Scott Woods in Columbus, Ohio, and like the Cafe Kerouac coffee shop, That's the audience I'm still kind of turned towards. I'm aware that there is a much greater audience than that, but if I thought about the amount of people who encounter my work and what they take from it, potentially, I think I would end up bowing to a lot of masters. And I would, at least while I can, like to be as much of my own master as possible.
That's it.
We have one more question back here, and I think then we're going to wrap it up. Question segment.
Yo!
What's up? I was already nervous, and now it's the last question, so I'm very nervous.
And everyone turned, for some reason,
I know.
turned around.
So I'm not going to stand up. I was slinking my seat. But I don't know. When we met however many years ago in Columbus, I don't know if you remember me as such, but I wanted to be a writer.
You were a writer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But I got around people who really took that shit seriously and realized that I didn't have the capacity to take that shit seriously, which pushed me towards visual art, which I did have the capacity to take seriously. So I'm grateful for people like you and Scott Woods. I lived across the street from Cafe Kerouac, so I got to see people who really, it meant more to them, and they would grind. So I wonder what you may have wanted to do, what else you may have wanted to do when you were younger, and or considering all the other things that you've done around writing, what may be a dream now that you would like to do in the future.
Whoa. Oh, wow. Thank you for that. I mean, what I loved when I was a kid was that I wanted to be everything when I grew up. I wanted to be, this impulse moved through me like the wind. If there was a bakery where the person baking seemed like they were having a good time and I liked the baked goods, so I wanted to be a baker. My dentist was nice to me, so I wanted to be a dentist. Like, these kind of things, you know what I mean? Like, I liked the sound that fire trucks made, so I wanted to be a fireman. Like, the impulse to pursue wanting to quote unquote be something, the childlike nature of that, I think broadens my idea around what becoming even is or can be. And I still don't know this. I say this to say that I think I am still becoming what I want to be. Sure, I'm a writer. That is my profession to some degree. But I'm still becoming the writer I want to be. Every time I walk away from a project, or every time I walk away from a poem or an essay or a sentence that I feel good about, I am a different writer than I was when I entered the day. And so I'm still becoming, and hopefully to continue to become. But there are other things that, maybe a stay-at-home dog dad. And just hang with Wendy all day. But no, I mean, in terms of what I still hope, there are big dreams. I really would like to be in some way. I don't have the ability to direct a documentary, at least yet, but I would really love to work on a documentary about the funk history in Dayton. That's something I've been dreaming about and kind of kicking around. I've like tapped into film in some weird ways. I'm executive producing a documentary on Milli Vanilli, which will be out next year. And I think, yeah, it'll be streaming. Yeah. And you know, I like co-wrote a documentary that is loosely about Kanye West, but not really. And so there's ways that I'm like dipping my toes into projects that are outside of the scope of just writing books that I hope open some doors for me to kind of, as always, turn a lens back towards Ohio, right? If I can get people to trust me enough, I can say, well, you know, like, there's a history in Dayton, and a lot of these guys are still alive. You know, one of the things I did early in the pandemic was I went to go see Steve Arrington, funk legend Steve Arrington, who's still out there in Dayton. And we sat and talked, and he was like, we're not dead yet. You know, some of us are, but so many of my friends who I came up with playing in basements, we're not dead yet. There's no archive. We were talking about how the Funk Museum in Dayton has not been able to kind of sustain itself as I would like to see it do, because it's brilliant, it's needed. I was like, there has to be this, I would love to do work that always turns a lens back to Ohio history, Black Ohio music history. I would love to, I don't know, Tracy Chapman deserves like a mini series. You know, Tracy Chapman deserves a statue. These things, I know that, again, so much of my work is about tricking people, right? If I, for example, trick Tin House into believing that I can be an acquiring editor, that means that I can trick them into believing that this young Black writer from Columbus has a book that's worth publishing. And here we are with Prince Shakur, right? If I can trick someone who makes film to believe that there are stories in Ohio worth telling, then we'll make it happen. And so, in some ways, I am becoming what I've always wanted to be at heart, which is a sometimes successful magician. And we'll see what I can do before time vanishes on me. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This has been really cool. I do want to extend some very deep gratitude to the Merc and to Wordplay and to everyone who came out, and to Downbound Books, and Greg, who initially reached out when I kind of stressed that I'd never read in Cincinnati, and it didn't make sense to me why that was the case. And to see so many people here. At one point, there was the mayor here, which I thought was wild. Is there a Reds game happening tonight? I thought maybe some of the players would stop by, but maybe next time. But y'all, I can't stress how much this has meant to me, and to everyone tuning in on the Crowdcast too. Thank you all for letting me spend an evening with you. It's meant the world.
Thank you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to give a few closing words. Also, if you have not purchased your book already, we have books available for purchase in the back, and Hanif will be signing books as we close out this evening. But thank you so much, one, to the Mercantile Library for hosting us this evening. Thank you so much to Wordplay Cincy, and definitely thank you so much to Downbound Books for putting this event together and making sure that it was a phenomenal success. So I want to encourage you all to tune in to the Urban Consulate's programming next month, where we partner with Cincinnati Social House for the Blink event, and we're going to be talking about where do we own culture in our city. So a very important topic. Invite all of you to come out to the conversation, join us, whether it be in person or through our live stream. Make sure you come out and join us for next month's event. And thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy yourself. Be safe this evening. Take care.